So today we have a panel, and it includes Harvey. Yes, Harvey does more than just show up each week for this show. We have Jim Carrier and Greg Mello, and all of these gentlemen attended a conference. So I'm going to ask Harvey, I'm going to turn it over to Harvey. Tell us a little bit about the conference, and then we can turn it over to the rest of the panel and get everybody's perspective about what went on. And then we've got a couple of clips that are kind of, well, they'll
Well,
generate some discussion. We'll
generate
see.
some discussion, but
Yeah.
everybody's got their own favorite moment, probably. Happy to introduce both Jim and Greg. Greg Mello is executive director of the Los Alamos Study Group. He's been working for peace with that group and others for over 30 years, and he's still at it. So, and then Jim Carrier is from Vermont. He says he lives down the street from Bernie, and he's a freelance journalist who uh, writes for a number of outlets. The card he gave me said Colorado Springs Gazette, but that's only one of his many connections. So glad to have both of you here. And both of them did attend the meeting, which was called I think it was the 16th annual Nuclear Deterrence Summit. Summit, mind you, not a conference, but a summit. This is like for the higher echelons. Anyway, yeah, this meeting, I was brand new to it, so wasn't sure what to expect, but I had a general idea when they're talking nuclear deterrence. It's going to be about weapons, right? That's what they think of when they say deterrence. Um, and I wasn't disappointed. The There were dozens of sessions, and I didn't go to all of them, but I know from the program that there was, out of all those, there was one program that had the word arms control in it. And actually, that was some of the most outlandish content that we heard. I thought that was ironic since the Nuclear Posture Review, uh, if you're familiar with that,
Is
goes
that
on.
the Biden nuclear posture
Yeah,
review or
the
the
Biden
Veterans for Peace?
2022, the Biden 2022 nuclear posture.
Oh, so it's the one that doesn't make sense as
Right,
compared
right,
to ours. Okay.
right. Yeah. Anyway, it just talks all about these modernization programs and land-based, sea-based, air-based, command and control, blah, blah, blah. It also says, quote, deterrence alone will not reduce nuclear dangers. I mean, that's the reason for the conference, is something that will not reduce nuclear dangers, not even reduce them. I mean, why do it if it's not going to reduce the danger? In any case, they do summarize it saying the Nuclear Posture Review identifies mutual verifiable nuclear arms control is the most effective, durable, and responsible path to reduce the role of nuclear weapons and prevent nuclear use. But it only got one session out of all these. And that session was anything but straight arms control. A lot of it was, well, we'll talk about it. Uh, Greg challenged it, and Jim did too. Both of them had something to say to the presenters on that one. But anyway, it was at a real nice hotel in Washington, and I was thinking I would, try to follow Anthony Donovan around because he'd been to him before, and turned out he wasn't able to uh, get his press credentials, which seemed strange to me. it turned out it had something to do with a little run-in he had the year before with handing out leaflets. So he he was on their list and not the good list, you know. So he had to really just hover around in the periphery and up in the lobby and find people to talk to. So he counted on me to go to the meetings and tell him what was going on. So, but I thought my thinking when I went, I got a little recorder device for it, and I thought what I want to do is just interview some of the attendees, just just ordinary people. Jim and Anthony had said before that he met a lot of nice people there. They're not bad people. They're friendly, and they'll enjoy talking with you. So I thought what I would try to do is just meet some people, get some rapport going, tell them what I was doing, and just try to get them to share some of their thoughts and whatever feelings they have about the work they're doing, about this whole nuclear project, uh, all these weapons, and how did that produce any stress for them, or any conflict, or what were their thoughts, or were they 100% behind it? And I didn't get very far with that because anytime I tried to talk to someone, just about everyone there uh, was with one of the corporate sponsors. Okay. Uh, these were the people.
But the federal government is sponsoring this, right?
The federal government, it's their project, but they don't fund it. It's funded by corporate contractors, weapons contractors, et cetera. So, and, they tend to be have a lot of latitude in what they present, and a lot of influence on what happens. So we can talk about that some. But those people that I talked to, they were afraid of being interviewed because I didn't realize I should have appreciated that, but they just said, "Well, you need to talk to our PR person. We can't talk to anybody." And I said, "I don't want to know I don't want to know the organization's, response. I want people to people, and I think people to people is what counts, and how we're going to understand each other." And they just were in no way was I going to convince any of them that to submit to an interview. So instead, I just tried to ask a few questions and try to tally things like how many of them knew about the UN treaty. You'd be surprised, very few of them knew about it. So these people this is their job, right?
Now, is that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear
Treaty on the
Weapons?
prohibition of nuclear weapons. And
Okay.
most of them, it was like deer in the headlights when I said that, but they weren't unfriendly, but they, weren't interested in being interviewed. So I just had to make the best of it. I found overall the whole experience was scary, and the feeling I got was, okay, now I kind of see what we're up against because they're just so steeped and ingrained in their way of thinking, and there's so many contradictions there that nobody really sees or raises.
First, can we turn it over to Jim Carrier and get his take?
Sure, Jim, you're up.
Okay, hi. Um, I'm uh, I'm coming at this as a reporter. I'm not as an acting or speaking as an activist per se, other than after sitting through this for 2 years, I ought to be, because it's very eye-opening. Greg is a guy who's been at this the longest, and for any detail, I go to him because he knows more about it. But I'll just tell you how this all came about. So I a number of years ago, worked for the Denver Post, and I had a job where I could take these big projects on. And in 1995, I did a big series called the Atomic Legacy in the West. And 95 was a kind of a real opening of everything because Hazel O'Leary was under Clinton was the energy secretary, and they were starting to declassify. And they published, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were publishing now booklets saying where all their stuff was, where all their factories were, largely because they had a lot of cleanup to do and they needed to tell people why they were spending money and so and so. And so I went all over the West. It was the Denver Post is, covers the West. I didn't go to Savannah River or Oak Ridge or anything really east of the Mississippi, but I did go to all the labs out there and to the test site and anyway. And then ultimately went to Hiroshima on the 50th anniversary of the bomb. And it began, I mean, it really literally from beginning to end. I actually found an old Indian man who had worked in a hand dug mine on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and he was able to take me to it. And the reason he was still alive was that he knew enough arithmetic as a kid that they gave him a job of standing at the opening of this mine and to keep tally of the number of wheelbarrows of pitch blende that they were bringing out. Almost everybody else who worked in the mine ultimately got cancer and died. But he was still alive, and we went out there with his walker, and I mean, it was really emotional to go there and see where this had come from. So at least some of the money. This was not uranium from that ended up in the Hiroshima bomb or the Nagasaki bomb, but it ultimately in the Cold War. And from there, this went full circle, if you will. To Hiroshima to see that. Anyway, many of the projects I did at the Denver Post I turned into books, and I wanted to do this one because it was of historical significance. And 2-3 years ago, when I realized I needed to do footnotes and fact checking and all of that, I began looking around and discovered that the story had changed. In 95, the labs were shut down. Los Alamos, in my view, was looking for something to do. You could tell that they weren't happy just, learning at crystallography and DNA stuff. They really wanted to do what they'd done all these years. And anyway, the budgets were shrinking. We were spending, I think at the time, my memory is that we were spending more, or at least budgeting more on cleanup than we were actually in the, if you want to say, the bomb making business. Rocky, at that point, Rocky Flats had shut down. I've learned since that Los Alamos was periodically making a pit. But anyway, so it was looking at the aftermath of it, what we thought was the aftermath, what I thought was the aftermath of it. And then remarkably, it has all come back to life. And so I went last year with my eyes wide open to the 15th, I guess, conference, Nuclear Deterrence, and was shocked, really, at a couple of things. One was how open they were in terms of what they were doing and what they were spending and what their plans were. And I wrote a piece both for the Gazette and Progressive, talking about basically the fact that we are in a new Cold War, certainly in a nuclear arms race, and that has not to this day be really been written about. It doesn't get much publicity, and it's kind of shocking to me. And among the other shocks that I had was the discovery that this all really began under a Nobel Peace Prize winner Obama, who was basically arm twisted into starting this modernization program. Well, that's now reached $1.7 trillion, spreading out over looking forward to the next 30 years. And last year, I haven't digested entirely this last meeting, but the tone was entirely different. Last year, it was woe is us. We can't find anybody to work here. We have supply chain problems. And we are, we've got this charge really from Congress to make 30 pits or 80, I guess, 80 pits. And we are way behind. And right then at that time, it was China, pretty much, and somewhat North Korea. Well, this year, this conference was, and I was saying, and I described it last year as a kind of a mix between a pep rally and a a layout of what the United States is doing in its nuclear business. This year, the tone of it, in my view, was entirely different, which was that we are underway. We've hired thousands, tens of, well, I forget how many numbers are, but thousands of new workers. The headline, the lead of the story that I have yet to write, but will this coming week for the Gazette in Colorado Springs, is that they will now, by August, I think, certainly this summer, have the first new plutonium pit done, war ready, is what they call them, in their new, as part of the process of rebuilding there. And Greg has reminded me that this is being made for a missile that's not even built yet. So
Yeah.
nonetheless, they're moving forward, and the whole atmosphere was much more upbeat. This is the nuclear industrial complex. They 80% of the people who work in the labs and work in the factories are contract workers. And then what you have is a small, really relatively small group of people at the top of the government who give the marching orders and control the budgets and advocate for that. But what you have underneath, if you look at it from some distance, is that you have a huge lobbying machine on behalf of nuclear bombs and nuclear deterrence. And now, as we know, it's not just the bombs and the modernization of that and the redoing of the plutonium pits, et cetera. They have 400 new missiles. They have new planes, bombers, and control centers, and they are going to be new submarines as well. So it's really a whole new war going on, and I think the American public, by and large, is completely ignorant of it. I guess I'll just stop right there and say that I will just tell you that. So what this conference is that this business magazine charges really modest amount, $2,000-3,000 for a booth. But then a breakfast, a guy was telling me that a breakfast at a hotel like that costs tens of thousands of dollars. So the sponsors help pay for the cost of it, but it's and they are boosters. And so to finish this last thought, what you have now is you have all of these industrial contractors who are lobbying, I'm sure, the government and their congressmen to support their jobs and their factory. and to grow them. And then you have the local congressmen who are doing the same thing. And so you have, a lot of money at stake, growth and dollars and all of that. And so I guess I would use the word frightening to see the inside of the sausage and see the almost, well, it is enthusiasm that these folks are bringing to it, and the power that they wield in focusing or into where we're going to be going. I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things that Greg really mentioned too, is that these contractors, they're just given more or less, here's what we want done, but they have so much latitude in what they do and how they do it, and of course, it's probably going to be their choices are going to have something to do with how much they're going to be making off it. So, it's kind of who's running the store. It's not anybody who's elected or has any connection with what people in the U.S. might want back in. This is the from the official program, the Nuclear Deterrence Program Guide, and they have a whole page on thank you to our sponsors, and they have different levels.
List some of the sponsors, Harvey, because our radio audience cannot see that.
Yeah, the grand sponsor is Longenecker and Associates. I've never heard of them, but I'm sure Greg has and can tell us about them. But they are the grand sponsor. Then the next level is the platinum sponsors, and that's a bunch of, well, there's Honeywell, which we all know, but the rest of them I'd never really heard of. Fluor, Jacobs, Amentum, and TechSource, and H.I. Hill. I don't know any of these companies. The old sponsors are more or less the ones that we're all familiar with. Bechtel, General Dynamics. There are a few that are less familiar, like AWS. That's Amazon Web Services. Is actually one of the gold sponsors. Merrick, Omega Technical Services. Anyway, then down on the silver level, at the bottom is Texas A&M University and some other companies I've never heard of, aerospace. And there's even one bronze sponsor. So in any case, that's the hierarchy there of the sponsors. And the vendors' booths were, just like a long array. Took a couple of rows to get them all in there, and they all had people in there. The first one I talked to was Bechtel, because I thought, oh yeah, because we'd been to Oak Ridge, Kathy and I, for the Y-12 protests that they have, vigils they have every Sunday, and we happened to be there for their anniversary of. So we got to meet Sister Megan Rice, and of course, I had to share with the Bechtel vendor that I gotten to meet the nun who broke through your security system at Oak Ridge.
Yeah. So we've heard from Jim and Harvey, Jim Carrier and Harvey Bennett, and let me ask you this: Harvey's new to the conference, and Jim, this is his second year. Are you new to the conference?
Hardly.
No. I've been at this a long time, and I've probably been to most of the 16, at least 12. It's a mental health challenge to go, and I am always a little unhappy about being there, and sometimes it's worse than others.
Why is that?
Because, it's gotten worse. Now, what I heard Jim say before my computer decided to go on vacation was that the tone is quite different this year. And I couldn't agree more. There's been a gradual shift at these conferences away from facts and toward ideology. So they become, in a way, less useful. So I don't like being sitting there helplessly getting showered with propaganda. And the larger the conference, the less opportunity there is to be involved. In past conferences, I know that I've had more floor time than any single speaker because of all the questions that I've asked and comments in the questions. And you know, it would kind of, I know that I was being comped in because it would liven up the place. And so that was, but it reflects the change in the political climate that I think you've all seen, and Jim just gave testimony to as well. We're going toward the political right in the nuclear business, and that's reflected in these conferences. And I should say that the composition of the conferences and the speakers is determined in part by the marketing of the organization that puts them on. I mean, heavily by it. So Access Intel, they're the trade press for nuclear warheads, and these contractors and government offices are the only ones that can afford to subscribe to their publications. And so that's probably why it is that way. This year's conference was very rah-rah, and exactly like Jim said, it was last year was woe is us, and that woe is us was the key message last year. And I'm quite sure that heads in the cabal of nuclear contractors, because that's what we're talking about here, got together and said, no, we don't want to do that again. There were way too much said about our problems with staffing and supply chains and all that. And they all had more or less a common theme of what a great year it was and how it'll be greater next year. I was also at the pre-conference meeting. I don't know if you guys were there, but it was more right-wing. And that's where the more leading edge nuclear, where we might be able to go if we are successful in selling our message. And so there was Christopher Yaw. I don't know, you probably talked to him from University of Nebraska. Seems like a really nice guy. And as Harvey was saying, there's sort of a contrast between some of the personal qualities of these people and their political ideas. But Chris Yaw was explaining how you could use fewer cruise missiles if they had micro nukes on them. And instead of taking 58 missiles to take out a Syrian airfield, you could use only 8. And if you know, at a 30-ton yield, and how we should use these surplus pits at Pantex to field a new generation of theater nuclear weapons, and how they wouldn't have to go through all of the extensive planning and analysis that the present weapons have to go through. And so we could field them quickly to respond to the numerous targets available in China and Russia, and that's how they'd say it. I heard in this ideological approach, I think that one of the purposes of the conference is, of course, to network among the various contractors, but to rehearse the narratives that are going to sell in the present political circumstances. So, the buzzwords, the current buzzwords, most popular ways of presenting things, there's the contracts at these sites for the listeners. They will run a site contract at an NNSA site is now running somewhere in value between 10 and $100 billion. So divided among, let's say, a small consortium of people that would form a site-specific LLC to run one of these places. And they don't have to hazard any of their capital to get one of these contracts. They just have to be chosen on the basis of their corporate resume and political factors.
Now, Greg, before you go any further, NNSA.
Oh, sorry.
Everybody's mentioned NNSA. What is NNSA?
It is a semi-autonomous subsidiary of the Department of Energy that was set up in 1999 to basically free nuclear weapons of some of the internal constraints that otherwise existed under DOE.
Okay,
So,
and it stands for
National Nuclear Security Administration.
National Nuclear Security.
Yeah.
And Harvey mentioned there was only one group that talked about disarmament. Wouldn't you think that National Nuclear Security would be talking about elimination?
Well, you would think.
Yeah.
You would think. The Harvey did, and Anthony Donovan did, certainly. And they all know it's out there. They know who I am, and for example, and but they didn't talk about it at all. The Arms Control Panel, as Harvey said, was I felt that there was real a special brand of real evil on that panel.
Yes.
And that was the one which was, fascinating in a horror movie kind of a way.
Or pick on up something that Greg said. And he talked about talking points. Well, I'm a journalist, and so I'm born skeptical, right? And veer into cynicism quite often. But the last year, I forgot what the talking point was last year, but what's striking to me is they have a certain catchphrase that they use, and it begins at the top with Ms. Ruby, who is the chief administrator of this department. And then you hear it repeated over and over and over again, almost as if it was distributed in probably was. Everybody's got this saying, well, this year, what you heard over and over and over again with every speaker was twin peer, remind me, Greg.
Two-peer crisis. Yeah.
Right.
Say that again, Jim.
Crisis. You say it again. I've lost track of what it was. No, it was twin peer, right?
Yeah, they're talking about the rise of China and
and it's called what?
Two-peer. They have now the potential of two nuclear peers instead of just the U.S. and Russia. Now they've got potentially two nuclear peers.
Yes.
And isn't that scary? And we need to do a lot more. And
developed last year. China was a growing menace. This year, it's a peer, and
that's
so
right.
That's one of the changes that has occurred. So it's now, now we've got three big nuclear powers, and then you got these other guys biting at the heels coming along. And next year, probably North Korea will be, I don't know what they'll call it, but they have. What I'm saying is that cynically, and it's just there to be. If you just listen to the tapes for the 3 days, you hear these same phrases, their same numbers, the same. Last year, it was it was this many warheads and this many this and this. It was all over and over and over again, talking points that is spread through this conference and probably ahead of time. I'm sure ahead of time. To the tribe, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have a clip. Maybe this is what you're talking about. I don't know who's talking, but it was part of a clip that Harvey sent me. that he called escalation management. And we're going to just listen to a little bit of that.
This is the guy
study
from
group was
AL.
not about China as a nuclear problem for U.S. strategy. It was about the emergence of a second nuclear peer. And what are the particular problems that come with having two nuclear peers for our nuclear strategy and posture? And the core analytic framework was to pose that question against the spectrum or continuum of conflict, peacetime, crisis, and war. And to say that in each of these phases, peacetime, crisis, and war, the fact of having two peers to worry about, and maybe one or two additional nuclear armed states, is consequential. In crisis, it's difficult to imagine that there will again be a time when we are only worried about one adversary in time of crisis. We are always now, henceforth, going to have to worry about a second adversary exploiting a moment of crisis between the United States and some other country to its advantage. Peacetime, crisis, war. In war, the study group deemed it unlikely that we would have to fight two major nuclear wars at the same time, but likely that we would face escalating crises that would both require nuclear deterrence actions.
Well, we'll leave it there because I just want everybody's comment. They said that, I mean, the guy is insane because within one sentence, he said it's unlikely that we'll have to fight two nuclear wars at once. I mean, who says something as insane as that? Because fighting one nuclear war is going to end humanity. So we don't have to fight two.
And
And the idea of fighting two,
supposed to be reassured because it's just unlikely. That means like
Jesus
it's a little less
Christ.
than 50-50, right?
Yeah, I got to say, they do believe in fighting and prevailing in a nuclear war. That's important to get on the table, and you're close to saying it, but I'm going to say it. That is an underlying assumption that that the United States must be prepared to fight a nuclear war and win. And I think that might have been Matthew Koenig. This report played a fairly big role in the conference. It was kind of the basis, and there was a panel about it.
And it's called America's Strategic
Posture, final report of the Congressional Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States. It's not a government body, but it was a group that is set up by the House Armed Services Committee.
And
But,
so
this is despite the fact that in January of 2022, they had the joint declaration of the US, the UK, China, Russia, and France saying in writing formally, a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought.
Mm-hmm.
And they're spending a whole conference talking about how they're going to fight a nuclear war and win it.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the premises of this conference?
It is underneath. It's not too far under the surface.
It's stated, but it's implied.
Mm-hmm.
And just the whole, the way they're deploying weapons and the kind of weapons they're deploying. Now they've got the nuclear ballistic submarine that's got the low yield options and all this. I mean, it makes no sense if you're just talking about deterrence. This is about war making.
Mm-hmm.
Good gracious.
Can I make, Jim, can I make 2
Yep.
points and then I have to buzz off and follow up? The two-peer thing, well, first of all, it always, when I sit through these meetings, it's very Strangelovian to me. I mean, it's it's like you can't fight in the war room. That it's that absurd when you realize what they're talking about in kind of nonchalant matters. And when the this reminds me a little bit of right after the world. What I was 1 year old when the war ended, but this we are now building. They want to be superior. That's the whole idea.
And they
kept saying,
means United
this,
States.
yeah, I'm going to say, well, I like to call it the enterprise. That's what they call themselves. The enterprise
The
is,
Enterprise, like Starship.
well, it's called the enterprise. It is the people who are at this, they make up the nuclear industrial complex,
That was
along with,
another buzzword, enterprise. You kept hearing it.
well, yeah, they use that. Yeah, I don't know how long they've used that, but that is the enterprise. Anyway, the enterprise is they kept saying we are not going to do a one-to-one thing. The fact is, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have more weapons now than anybody does, and we will continue to have more than anybody does. And so we already have superior power in the nuclear business, and we will all. And this, nobody wants to say it, but it seems to me that it's clear that they're going to want to build more and faster than anybody else, so that we still have more. So this thing about peer is a little crazy, I think. But and the other thing I wanted to mention is um, it's I'll never forget last year's meeting, when Anthony was in another one of his colleagues was standing outside holding a banner that said nuclear war is illegal, and they weren't allowed in last year into the hotel. And so what I saw were this $1.7 trillion nuclear industrial enterprise, and then outside on the sidewalk were two guys opposing it. And that to me is a metaphor for where we are in this country. I mean, God help Greg and the folks like him who are around, but you don't hear much about them. And well, you hear from Greg, and he's the expert on outside of the lab. But the where is the peace movement? Where is the anti-nuclear movement? Where is the that's especially given the fact that we're doing this, spending this much money and on this enterprise, and to maintain our superiority in spades. So that's to me that's the total craziness of it. I mean, it's like, we don't think we think Stalin was wrong when he tried to match us, but that we're doing the same thing. We never wanted Stalin. Everybody's chasing each other to try to get some sort of superiority, but it only takes a couple of bombs to become dangerous. So anyway.
Can I say something about that? Because that's Jim is touching on some important points. I wanted to say that the buzzword enterprise for this cabal or this club was not used in the early years of these conferences. So that started in maybe 10 years ago, roughly. Before that, it had a more federal character. Enterprise is more of a capitalist character.
Right.
And there's an old timer who used to run a lot of the weapons complex. I'll just say Steve Gadis. He ran Rocky Flats and the Savannah River and the production plants out of the Albuquerque office. And he said to me in one of the breaks several years ago, he said, they call it the enterprise. I'll tell you what, that's the problem. It's not an enterprise. And I know from talking to people who worked in that office and others, And we see it, this change, this cultural change from civil service to profit. And that happened about 10 years ago. I wanted to say about this question of parity and the two peer adversaries. We know from conversations on Capitol Hill that comes straight from Stratcom. So that is where that term comes from. Someone asked Stratcom whether they thought we'd ever see negotiations to get rid of a third of the U.S. arsenal, as we were close to having under Obama at one point. And the word from Stratcom is no, that we will not do that because we now have two peer adversaries. And Jim is absolutely right. There is a felt need to manufacture as many nuclear weapons as possible. What the United States feels like we're losing the capacity to coerce. So I think that when people at the top of our government talk about deterrence, they really mean coercion. So, it doesn't take that many nuclear weapons to deter someone from attacking us, but to prevail decisively in conflicts with adversaries creates a coercive situation that can be used in negotiations and as a top cover for expeditionary forces. So, and it's multidimensional, as I think Jim also mentioned a moment ago, the Space Force. Rasmussen's talk at the conference about those space assets and how fast they were getting them up into orbit, how quickly they could get the data to the warfighter on the ground so he could tighten the, what do they call it, the kill chain, the target to the identification of the target to the, that's all very important, and it's closely connected to this coercion, of which nuclear weapons is just one part. So we saw at that conference the nuclear warhead part, but it's connected to this broader felt need to have a coercive power, which is slipping away or has slipped away. That's mine.
Well, it's like Ellsberg talked about. We use nuclear weapons all the time.
For a deterrent.
Listen, fellow,
Or for a threat.
I appreciate your work, but I've got to sign off and do some other things. And if I know where to reach you when I write about it. And
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks
Jim.
so much, Jim, for your contributions, and we will send you a link to the show.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Great to see you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
So, Greg, hopefully you can stay for a little bit longer. And I did have another clip here once again, I don't know who these people are speaking, but this was clear enough to hear the answer.
Is excited about spending $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years on nuclear weapons.
That's who?
That's Jim that just left.
All right.
Yeah.
He was talking about the hypocrisy of
How is the world
US
or the United States able to square that and not think that you're hypocritical?
I will say within NNSA and within the NNSA complex, it is absolutely true that the Defense Nuclear Non-Proliferation Appropriation, which includes our counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and our emergency response, as well as our DNM program, is not of the same scale of the defense program's budget. That is a factual statement, and anybody can look at that. But I will say we are investing in our capabilities too, and our budgets are going up too. And we are recognizing that it's not a counterbalance, like I said, because it's not in opposition per se, but if we are going to be entering, not just entering, if we are being forced to exist in a world with greater uncertainty and greater instability, we also have to be willing to invest in the tools and the capabilities and the capacities that can help contribute to bringing the world back the other direction. So I'm not going to without speaking to the broader NNSA budget as a whole, I will say under this administration and under this administrator, we have been investing in our capabilities as well, and I think that's really important. It's really important for us to be walking the walk on non-proliferation, nuclear security, and arms control at the same time as we're thinking about how our complex responds to the broader geostrategic threat environment.
That's our lady there.
So she's insane.
Yeah.
She's another one. So Greg,
Earlier in that clip, Greg's on, but maybe the quality wasn't good. But
Was that the Assistant Secretary of State?
yeah,
She was one of the higher ranking people there that is making those narratives. The other one was General Cotton from Stratcom, and I do want to get out while we can that the theme from last year was there this year, but in muted form. It was almost like we can't talk about that. We can't talk about how actually we're overwhelmed with work. And they were a little proud that they were working on 5 different kinds of nuclear weapons at the same time, more than any. They're working at a pace which is greater than since the 1980s, and they're adding 2 more. Well, 1 for sure and 1 possibly. And so that'll be 7 kinds of nuclear weapons at once. And they are behind in everything. And it was kind of the cost overruns and the schedule overruns were banished to little mumbles on the side. And but they're quite real. And one of the people on Capitol Hill that was there, I said, in a break, I said, how seriously are you guys taking the debt and the debt service that is now growing exponentially in the federal budget? And they said, oh, very seriously. And I said, are they going to be able to do all this? No, they're going to have to prioritize. And so that sort of talk was banished from the stage.
the idea of prioritization, meaning something doesn't get a top priority and then doesn't get funding, that was eliminated from the stage.
Yes.
And there was also sort of a rallying cry, on budget, on time. Which never happens.
No, it never happens. None of it is. This Bechtel National President Dina.
Yeah, she was not impressive.
No, she was not impressive, frankly. And they're in charge of the uranium processing facility at Y-12. It's
Right.
years behind and billions over
Yeah.
cost. And it's Marvin Adams, the number 2 at NNSA, has been running back and forth trying to bring that thing closer to where it's supposed to be. Some of these projects and pit production, they can't make nuclear weapons without having those things finished.
It's
Yeah.
insane.
And they're talking about Savannah River, which has never done that even, and they don't have anything in place to do it.
Right.
And they're supposed to be, and Los Alamos wants to ship everything over to Savannah River. They don't want to do any of them.
Well, that's another longer conversation. They wanted Los Alamos would love to do it all, but they can't. At Los Alamos, they can't get people to work. They can't house them. They're potentially, they've been talking seriously about splitting Los Alamos lab into other sites in Santa Fe. They're negotiating for a new Los Alamos lab in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and because they can't fit it all. So
where are you, Greg?
I'm in Albuquerque now.
Okay.
We moved down here from Santa Fe.
So you're close. You're right in the belly of the beast.
Yes, a few miles from here, more nuclear weapons than anywhere else on the planet. New Mexico spends almost half the entire warhead budget. Yeah, there's a lot of it around here.
And you're still smiling. So,
And it's
well,
one of the poorest.
yes, and it has done no good for us.
Right.
I'm smiling because I know people like Harvey and other people, and it's a good life. Some of the best people.
mhm. I got a guy from GAO did a decent job. I thought he brought a little bit of sense of sanity, humanity. So here he is.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm David Wishart from the Government Accountability Office. I suppose my question was mainly for Renee, but to go to everyone.
He said Renee. Who's Renee?
I'm wondering if you
Bechtel.
can elaborate a bit more on what China has expressed interest in entering into cooperatively, and how this affects, to the extent you can share it, our thinking about what we might still be willing to do cooperatively with Russia. There's some dependencies here that I don't think were impinging as hard on the New START negotiations, in my understanding. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
To the heart of your question, I think from our perspective, if we're looking at a future in which we still have numerical arms control with Russia, numerical nuclear arms control, to be specific, it is our force posture, what we think our sort of upper limit should be, is naturally going to be dependent on where we see China end up. So if you're looking at the 2026 timeframe and what projections there have been for where China may be in 2026, that has to factor into our negotiation with Russia on any sort of new agreement that limits strategic nuclear forces. I will say again, at this stage, China has not expressed any interest in engaging in a conversation to limit their own nuclear forces in a way that we have had with Russia historically, from the SALT process through the START process after the end of the Cold War. It is our hope that at some point they will be willing to talk about that, and if not talk about numerical limitations as it relates to the three categories in New START, talk about numerical limitations on other types of capabilities related to warheads, etc. I think it's logical in one way for China to perceive that they don't have a comparable nuclear force to either the United States and Russia, and thereby don't have any interest in limiting themselves right now. But one thing that we try to communicate publicly, and then obviously in our own private channels, is that the decisions they make, the decisions they're making now to build up their nuclear forces, do impact our ability to engage with Russia, a much larger nuclear rival in this case. And so they have to keep in mind that we can't sort of sit still and wait because we do have a timetable and a relationship with Russia to manage, a relationship that is much more acutely dangerous now than it was at the time that we started negotiating. Go, stop there.
So the GAO guy was asking about trying to do something cooperatively, apparently, and the Renee, if she's the lady from Bechtel, she was not understandable at all.
No, that was it sounded like Renee, but it's Prenay. It was Prenay from the National Security Council. He does arms control for Biden.
Yeah, and he was like the voice of moderation compared to Mallory.
Yeah.
Jesus. Because and I probably missed this, but what I was getting out of that was, well, it's up to them to limit their stuff. We're not going to limit until they limit. And maybe I understood that wrong, but that doesn't make any sense either.
There was an underlying assumption that we were all very Russophobic and Sinophobic. So I'm just going to be very blunt here. This agenda is founded on ignorance and racism. It's a big part of how this slides right past people. It's been built up ever since it became a political tool in the domestic context here. And some people I talked to at the conference, well, one person who really should have known a lot better, they're just completely ignorant about other aspects of foreign policy, recent history, these are, I talked to someone on the America Strategic Posture Committee. She didn't really know anything about U.S.-Russian relations. That was very shocking. And so I think this is the thing that exercises me more than any other thing. It is the acquired stupidity and incompetence in the very highest parts of our government, which we did not have in the past. Even under Reagan, there were hawks, but there were a lot of realists who had a respect for their counterparties in the Soviet Union. Now that is gone. So now we have arrogance and ignorance combined.
It's a pretty
Okay.
dangerous combination. Yeah.
We've to mention that we've heard from Ray McGovern, who has a pretty much disdain for the folks around Biden, calling them rookies.
Yes.
And so it sounds to me, Greg, like you're seconding that
Yes.
that
I am.
stance.
Yes, I'm a Ray McGovern fan, and there's a bunch of people in his part of the world that are way more capable than the people who are setting policy in the State Department and National Security Council right now.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Well, I got a couple of other questions, but I do want to hear. I got clips from two people who actually made some sense. All right. So here's the first one.
Thank you. Thank you for your panel. I guess I think that the righteousness that I'm hearing about the U.S. position in the world is quite misplaced. And it frightens me and it makes us less secure. I feel that both the National Security Council and the State Department are functional echo chambers at this point. And I'm wondering, can we get back to a more realist approach in the world that is a little less righteous? And I don't think we understand our adversaries very well now. And I think that we need to do more to create these channels that Corey was saying are still there in important vestigial forms. And so my question is about red teaming. It's about how do we bring in some of the dissident voices that might make the discourse within your respective offices richer and potentially more fertile and able to find a way forward and create in the medium term greater stability despite the apparent disagreement that you see.
All of the discussions that we have, unlike the one we're having today, is supported by the intelligence community, the Defense Department, information that is available to our fingertips.
I got to end it there. I just got to end it there. The comment went on and on, but that was you, Greg, right?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And you were saying, is there a chance to have a little bit more realism, a little bit more rationality? And he immediately says, well, we've turned it over to the investigator, the NSA, the Defense Department. And I'm going, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
it started I don't know when it started, but I certainly heard it under Obama. I remember calling back here to talk to my wife after a meeting in the Obama administration. The budget people were great, but over in the policy side, they couldn't hate Russia enough. And oh my God, this is going to go to a very dark place. This man I spoke to was almost frothing at the mouth, and he had been fed this intel to manipulate his consciousness about what was going on in Ukraine, which is much more complicated than the simplistic picture that I got from him in the National Security Council.
Good gracious. Well, I got one more clip of somebody who made sense, and I hope we can hear it. So
Is
listen,
this the response to Stratcom?
listen close.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Harvey Bennett with Pacific Radio. I'm a Vietnam veteran, but my concern is, over the last 3 days of this conference, I've been amazed. I don't have the scientific level of understanding, but just the incredible advances that have been made with technology, both with weapons systems, etc., but also surveillance, monitoring, and I think the military is doing the job they've been tasked with, and I give them credit for that. For me, those who are missing in action are the diplomats. And I say that because understanding that when I think about what's an acceptable level of risk in strategic deterrence, if it's not zero, then it's not acceptable, because we're talking about annihilation, not just of our country, but worldwide. And someone mentioned eliminating risk earlier, and they corrected themselves and said reducing risk. We can't eliminate risk. My concern is that our successes in modernization and technology are laudable, but in the big picture, do they make us safer, or do they increase our adversaries' sense of vulnerability and reduce their time, especially with some of our technologies, reduce their decision time when there's a question about whether they're under attack with a nuclear weapon. So I think that's a big concern of mine. I also wanted to mention the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force in January of 2021. We are not a signatory of that. None of the nuclear states are at this point. But we are a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Article 6 of that treaty mandates the nuclear states to pursue, in good faith, negotiations with the other states to reduce the nuclear arsenals with a view to disarmament, and to pursue a treaty, a general treaty eliminating nuclear weapons globally. We have that treaty now with the UN treaty. So, I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to be out of a job, but I think the world wants peace, the world wants security, and I don't think that's a zero-sum game. We can't be secure if the rest of the world isn't secure. And for me, relying on nuclear weapons is not going to make us safe. I was alarmed when I read a report of General Hayden, who had your job back in 2018, speaking to the Arms Control Association. He was describing the global thunder, strategic deterrence, war games, and he was pretty blunt with them. He said, I hate to tell you, but it ends the same way every time. It ends bad. And by that, I mean it ends in global nuclear war. This is the head of Stratcom saying that. Now, I don't know what his thoughts are now, but, even if it isn't every time, if it's one in a million, that's too many. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
So, Harvey, that was you. What was their answer?
Well, that's what I was criticized for, not posing a question, but I thought I was posing a question. I just didn't spell it out.
What was their response?
I don't know whether he would have said anything, but they didn't give him much time.
Well, they gave him plenty of time. They gave him plenty of time. There was a long pause, and then a lady comes on and says, "Thanks for coming. Have a nice day."
The conference is over.
I wanted to say what a wonderful comment that was, which was a question also. And the fact that it went on so long and how patient the audience was, they knew that this is the kind of voice that was being excluded, and they felt guilty. And here was an articulate voice speaking rationally about the problem that they think about themselves, but can't or don't talk about. So I felt that Harvey was channeling the unconscious of many of the people there.
Excellent.
I hope you're right. It was really an impulsive thing on my part. I had raised my hand earlier and they didn't see me. And as time was winding down, a guy was sitting behind me and said, "Hey, I saw you raise your hand. I've got a mic if you want to ask a question." And just then she said, "We have time for one more question." Hey, this is meant to be,
Right.
Yeah.
And I also felt like Dan was up there watching me.
So, Greg, in your discussion with Harvey, you mentioned a crisis coming. And I want to key in on that because we've had a number of people come on the show over the last 4, 5, 6 months, which have talked about they don't know what it is, but something's coming.
Right.
So give us your perspective.
Oh boy, it's like that. We have this exponentially rising payments on the money that the federal government has borrowed. So you might argue, well, we could just borrow an indefinite amount and that doesn't matter, but the interest payments have to be paid. So that is now as much as the defense budget. So, it's almost $8,000 per household for defense, and then it's about that much again for interest. So we have $15,000, $16,000 per household per year going down the drain, and that is to say, not in making goods and services or infrastructure that the country needs. And that's a huge drain, and it's increasing. Other mandatory spending is increasing. You can't raise taxes exactly because so much, politically, I mean, it will throw the country into recession. No politician wants to do that. And so we have that. We have really a worsening climate crisis that the probability of one or more major climate events, they're climbing. We've loaded the dice. There could be a flood in California like there was in 1862, in that time frame, when a lake formed in the Central Valley that was 300 miles long. And cows and people washed out under what is now the Golden Gate Bridge. We have a political crisis. We have someone who is president who really can't remember things or be able to push back against these deep state forces like the nuclear industry, the military as a whole, and he's supposedly running for president. We have another candidate who is mercurial, widely hated by some, loved by others, but under siege and definitely not in a sort of political mainstream. And you don't know what he's going to do if he is elected, if he's able to run. We have all of these political things going on that are very volatile. And then we have our wars. We are in an expanding war in the Middle East of our own choosing. We can't seem to rein in our genocidal ally, Israel, and the United States standing is falling like a stone in the world for good reason. People, 1 or 2 million people are starving if they're not, buried under rubble. And in Ukraine, that project is collapsing. We have any one of these places could be a flashpoint for further war, but clearly already, and then of course we've blown up the natural gas supply of our strongest ally in Europe. And all of these things point to a kind of hinge in history, which we are at. And what happens now is not clear, but it's not going to be like it has been before. And so there's this, everyone that we work with, and the young people, they all have a sense of foreboding, like the future is not guaranteed, that there's a sense of volatility, a sense of loss that I never had growing up. When people look in the future, they see a blank now.
Mhm. Well put.
Good gracious. That's Greg. Is there anything that you wanted to say? I know this has been really scattered back and forth and whatever. But is there anything you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say that was that's important?
I think it's important to say that this industry is not monolithically strong. That I think I just want to repeat that they can be beaten, and if we actually participate in the political process, by that I'm not sure exactly what I mean. But you guys are certainly doing it, and and I hope we can be alert to strange bedfellows. I read this morning that conservative Senator Mike Lee from Utah spoke apparently for 4 hours against more aid, more support for the war in Ukraine. Well, good for him.
Yeah.
So when you got Ray McGovern and Mike Lee on the same side, that's saying something.
Yeah.
So I guess I just wanted to encourage, and I feel encouraged by you guys. And I think there's a lot of latent support, and I think people are sick of violence.
Mhm.
Well said. Well said. And you work for
A few things. I was a state regulator. I was an inspector at Los Alamos Lab. I was the first outside inspector there. There's only a limited, number of legal handles that one has over the nuclear weapons business. But anyway, and so I've been now doing this for quite a long time. It just seemed like if we could prevent another Cold War, that it would be worthwhile. Well, we've had successes, and they don't have a pit factory at this point to make new atomic bombs. The United States just can't do that. And we hope to extend that period of time so that that will provide some breaks. We do have more ways to further that, being here in the belly of the beast. And I don't want people to be discouraged, but to fold in this need for cooperation that was in the GIO question, that beautiful GIO question. I think there's a latent support for that. We need it for climate. We need it in so many ways. And our nuclear disarmament cause has so many latent friends that if we can open up those political relationships. Anyway, that's about it.
So are you going back to the conference next year?
I'm not sure. This was rough for me. As getting just like sheep dipped in this propaganda hour after hour and day after day with not very many facts. They were very careful not to say things that Harvey and Jim and I could use in our work. And so there was just a very slight sprinkling of useful information that came. So anyway, I can't say for sure right now. The all of Washington is a little bit consumed in a war fever.
Yeah.
And the changes that I mentioned, they affect our pattern of work. The normal way that Congress works, the oversight process, such as it has been, is fallen to a very minimal level now.
Well, Christ, this has been uplifting. Jesus. So,
well, you have the advantage and also the burden of knowing a lot more than we do.
Oh, but yeah, I don't know about that.
So, well, we'd like to get you on again. Hopefully, Veterans for Peace out in New Mexico is an ally. We talked to Ken Mayers and Greg Corning.
We had Charles on, or the nuclear silo.
Powell, or
yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So I guess we'll let you go, and we'll be back in touch. And we've got a webinar that's being hosted by the No Nukes program of Veterans for Peace that includes Dr. Ivana Hughes and Timon Wallace.
Yes,
and
I know Timon.
Okay, and so we'd like you to attend and ask pointed questions. So we will we'll send you the place to register for that. That would be great. It's going to be the February 29th.
Okay.
At 6 p.m. Central.
Okay.
So
just thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to you guys. And, thank you for your work, which is very important, and really, really appreciate it.